Some people, when faced with adversity, crumble, wither, and give up. Then others, like my guest today, take up the challenge of living a life outside the lines. Not only does he live bravely, screaming to the world his authentic self, but he works tirelessly, taking care of those that society deems unworthy of its support and love. He's a beacon of truth, of love, and of courage. I'm Patrick Marano, and this is Queerly Us. He's Maggie's Toronto Sex Workers Action Project's manager of their HIV and harm reduction program. He's written about HIV stigma, disclosure, resilience, HIV prevention, sexual health, and sex work. His good looks landed him the role of national campaign model for the hashtag Love is Love is Love campaign and the Canadian AIDS Society's hashtag Sex Happens World AIDS Day campaign. In 2020, he joined the board of Mirmex nonprofit housing, whose mandate is to provide secure, affordable housing for people living with HIV in Toronto. And he himself has been living and thriving with HIV for over 20 years. He's the unstoppable Michael B. Michael.
Hi, Patrick.
That was a mouthful. Welcome to Queerly Us.
Thank you for that very thoughtful and loving introduction. I'm very
Well,
flattered.
oh, the first part. Well, no, listen. I whenever I sit down to write an intro, I just let whatever come out. Like whatever. It's not planned too much in advance. Like it's just whatever comes. And so obviously this is what I think about you. So I hope it's okay.
Thank you. No, I'll
Yeah.
take it. I'll take it.
Yeah. Listen, so we've known each other for a little while now. I got hooked up with Maggie's, where you work, through their book club. And now I've gone to a few seminars and stuff that you've hosted. So finally, I've been able to nab you and bring you onto my podcast. So thank you for being here. I super appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me.
Well, no, please, because when I think of you, I really think of somebody who is outspoken and very brave and very comfortable in your own skin. So tell us, has it always been that way for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of my icons growing up, all the people that I admired and looked to were truth tellers. There were people who slung from the hip, shot first, asked questions second, and I really admired those people for their bravery. And so I think I've always tried to emulate them. And then I think there's just a great deal of naivety and stupidity on my part that I didn't even think for a second to conceal or mask what I was thinking or what I was feeling at any given time. Part of that's youth, and as you get older, you learn to be a little bit more strategic in what you reveal and who you trust. But I definitely felt growing up in Ottawa in the early 2000s that there was a lack of representation of people living with HIV in community. There was a culture of silence. And we can delve into the reasons of why that was and why that still is. But I felt like a duty to sort of step up and be front facing in public and convey outside of my social network the realities of what living with HIV looked like.
So let's talk about that. You brought up Ottawa, and so you've been living with HIV for 20 years. It was a very
Over
different
20 years.
over 20 years. How old are you? It was a very different time back then. I mean, to become HIV positive over 20 years ago meant something different than it was today. So how was that for you, first of all, that
Well, I
experience?
know.
Yeah?
Yeah, I was going to say, I know you've also spoken publicly about your HIV status.
Yeah.
Are you comfortable revealing when you were diagnosed
Yeah,
or
sure.
roughly what year?
Yeah, it was I would say like 2008.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're around the same time. I was a little earlier than you, but
Yeah.
um it uh it it was just a totally different ballgame,
Yeah.
really. Um okay, so it's interesting because I sort of think of it as there being sort of three generations of folks who have been living through the HIV epidemic and all vastly have different experiences, but also lots of similarities, right? So you have the
Mm.
people that were pre antiretroviral therapy. So you're talking about like everyone diagnosed prior to like 95, 96, and then everyone diagnosed after 95, 96 who had access to what they call the Lazarus drug, but like great drugs that were keeping folks healthy and well, and keeping their viral load suppressed. And then, like in 2014, you kind of have PrEP. And then PrEP is
Hmm.
also a game changer, but it's
Changed it.
not a game changer necessarily for people living with HIV, but it's been
No.
a game changer for how people treat people living with HIV now that they feel that they have some agency to protect themselves
Right.
against the virus.
Right. It's
And
changed
so all
everything.
those three groups are like I've had vastly different experiences, right?
Hmm. So we're kind of the middle group, right?
Yeah, yeah. Like I talked to some of the younger folks in my life who are thinking about taking PrEP or are just starting PrEP or who are just like negotiating relationships in the city. And like when I tell them about some of the like horror stories that I've had, dating and just being in community, they're like appalled and shocked and they can't imagine that
Yeah.
like the experiences that we've had and the things that people have said to us and the interactions that we've had with other health authorities, with police, like it's a totally different world for us versus them, you know?
And has your personal relationship with HIV changed at all? I mean, since when you were first diagnosed versus today?
Yeah, I always have to be careful. So when I do workshops in community, I always have to sort of like preface it by saying, like, I've been living with HIV for over 2 decades, and I'm going to be fairly flippant
Yeah.
about how I discuss it. And,
Yeah.
I like AIDS jokes and I won't, make light of the situation and I will
Sure.
downplay it. But I mean, the reality is yeah, like it was really tough and it was really hard. Um, but I'm not in that place anymore, and I have a different relationship to the virus now than I did then. And that relationship is always growing and changing. So even, at 42 years old, being like, oh, um, seeing the way that I date and the kind of relationships that I have and how comfortable I am confiding in people and trusting people. And when I actually stop and think about it, I can relate a lot of the problems and issues that I have in my interpersonal relationships with my experiences growing up living with HIV.
Hmm.
And so it does impact you, and you don't always realize how much and to what extent. And part of it too is like you don't want to give people that power, right? You don't want to say to people like, actually, the shitty, horrible way you treated me has like really hurt me and impacted me in all of these ways.
Yeah.
So I think there's a bit of like a bravado to it that you're just like, no, like I'm fine. You don't win,
Yeah.
but there comes a point where you do realize that, yeah, it does impact you.
It does, and you're right. It really is living with HIV. That's what it's about. Do you feel your HIV status has uh, informed your work choices, like your career path? Yes, that's a yes.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I always worked in community. I actually started as a bartender, and that's how my sex worker journey started, actually. Um, like just hooking in the clubs. But I started that way and was always really invested in community, wanted to give back to community, felt indebted to community. I felt indebted to my elders. I wanted to support them the way that they've supported me.
Mm,
Very conscious from an early age that like I had it better than the people before me and that I had a
mm,
responsibility to keep that momentum up. So
mm.
I've always sort of been in the non-for-profit sector, but obviously just someone who's living with HIV, like I naturally gravitate towards the agencies or the opportunities that allow me to work directly with community that I have lived experience in, and I think I can bring something to the table that maybe somebody who isn't living with HIV can.
Absolutely. I can totally see myself in what you're saying. I, I was I was a part of the board of the AIDS Committee of Toronto, and I've done a lot of things like that, the AIDS Walk, and I always feel like I want to give back because I feel so fortunate to have received such great care and life-saving medications, and like you said, doing it for myself, but looking back and seeing the people that came before me that didn't have the access to those things, and just being grateful, and then wanting to give back, to the agencies and everything that have helped my journey. So I can totally. You brought up the sex work, which is great because I wanted to talk about that and how interesting. You're a bartender, so walk us through if you want to. Well, no, what because I know people are listening and people are always so interested in that because it's not everybody that can do it, and they always have, there's so many preconceived notions and stuff. So it's nice to hear somebody talk about, what it's like. So take us through it. You're a bartender. How does that happen?
So I won't say the name of the place that I worked,
Sure.
but I worked in a club that had go-go boys twice a month, twice a week,
Okay.
and we had champagne room dances, and so it was a very sexually charged atmosphere.
Yeah.
And I was very young at the time. I was like 19, I think, when I started working there, um, and worked there for several years. And I would get propositioned. And initially, I had all of those like ingrained sex negative messaging
Even
that we
you.
grow up with and that we internalize. Of
Yeah.
course,
Yeah.
that like sex work is naughty, good
Yeah.
girls don't do it,
Yeah.
all of that stuff. And then I also, as a bartender, I felt that I um, had more power by keeping my clothes on. That titillation, that
Mm,
constant sort of titillation and flirtation was better not realized
right.
because that kept them coming back, that kept them engaging with me,
Sure.
and so
That's
my
that's
tips
a
would be
very
better. Is how I.
smart that's a big nugget of knowledge that you had as such a young person, because you're absolutely right. It's the unattainable that they can that's always going to keep bringing them back. That's very interesting. Anyway, go on.
Yeah, yeah, and then I just was getting propositions, and eventually someone made me an offer that I thought, oh, I'd be stupid to turn this down, and
Oh.
wanted to sleep with the person anyway. Would have done
Ah.
it for free.
Yeah.
So I felt like it was a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Now, what was interesting about my experience was that I often was like meeting the clients face to face. I was observing them. They were often already intoxicated. I was seeing how they were on alcohol. So
Mm.
I had like a lot of knowledge
Yeah.
like going into it, and I felt very safe and secure doing it. I was less crazy about soliciting online. So back in the day,
Hmm.
we had something called chat rooms. And you would hope to be the one of the 100 gay men on gay.com that could get into the main chat room so that you could, peddle your wares and try to
Yeah.
entice people. But that was like a very hostile environment too, right? Because people would like send you like, get out of here, whore, and like, fuck you. And you
Oh,
would just like get a
wow.
lot of abuse in those spaces too from
Okay.
people who resented you being in them, and had their own issues with sex work. So yeah, that's kind of how my career started. And then I was doing that for a while. And then I like, met other sex workers. And then I would do some duos and, share clients and that kind of thing. And I did that for a while. And then I became HIV positive. And when that happened, I ended up putting more or less a stop to the sex work that I was performing because at the time, HIV exposure, let alone transmission, just exposure,
Hmm.
was heavily criminalized.
Right.
And I saw people go to jail. I saw
Oh,
people who got phone calls from police. I saw people who had to go into the station and give statements. I
God.
saw civil legal proceedings. I saw people fork over money. Like I saw people lose their house. Like it was a very scary
Insane.
time. And
Yeah.
so I just didn't feel like the monetary benefits of the work that I was doing part time was really worth the risk to myself. And so I stopped. The other side of that too was that I didn't like the idea of my HIV conversion being conflated with sex work. That
Mm.
I did not get HIV as a result of my sex work. I did not get it from a client. But as soon as you put both of those things in a sentence, that's where the people's minds go, right? You did a bad thing, quote unquote, and
Yeah.
you are, quote unquote, getting punished for
Yeah. Yeah.
and that wasn't the case at all. It was in my personal relationships that I
Oh.
wasn't being such a stickler for safer sex. And it bit me in the ass, unfortunately. And I did end up contracting HIV at the age of 21. So I kind
You,
of had to move away from the sex work at that point, and I wasn't happy about it. It wasn't a choice that it was really made for myself. It
yeah.
was a choice that I just felt like I had to make.
So you would have continued had things been different.
Um, I think I might have I think I might have taken, how do I phrase this? I think I would have invested more time and energy and money into that side hustle.
Yeah.
I think I would have done it longer and sort of more openly and prouder and expanded the kind of services that I was offering and engaged in. So I feel a bit cheated of that experience. Like it was not a happy choice to make, but
You kind of already answered this question, but I was going to ask you, maybe you can go more into it. What would you say to somebody who would say, yeah, you were a sex worker. Of course, you became HIV positive.
yeah, I mean, sex workers, we know that sex workers practice safer sex at greater rates than the general population.
Well, you know
Sex
that,
workers
but I
are,
think people that are watching
yeah,
this,
people
maybe
don't.
they do, I don't think they know.
Yeah,
So please tell
yeah,
us, tell us all
yeah.
about it.
I mean, sex workers are by necessity sexual health experts most of the
Hmm.
time. And if they don't know what they need to know going into it, they certainly learn it on the job.
Right.
Um, so this idea that like sex workers are vectors of disease is a very popular misconception that is spread through popular culture. Um, we were right up there from the very beginning of the epidemic being blamed for the transmission of HIV. Right from the start. I don't know. You're probably old enough that you've heard about the three H's or sometimes the four H's.
What
So
were
in the
those?
Yeah, so in the early 80s, people attributed HIV transmission to Haitians, hemophiliacs, homosexuals, and sometimes hookers.
Oh,
And those were the four people that were being looked at by public health, who were being looked at in the media, who were being scrutinized,
oh,
who were
wow.
being blamed.
Imagine you were
And
a Haitian hemophiliac homo hooker. I mean, you would
yeah,
be like ground zero.
yeah, be screwed.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah.
It's fun for people to put blame on other people. It's easier for them, isn't it?
Well, listen, it didn't do me any favors
Hmm.
because when I was coming up, in the late 90s, early 2000s, I had a warped perception of what HIV was and where it was and how it was transmitted. You have to remember that uh, like 20 years ago, like we didn't have the internet.
Yeah.
We didn't have smartphones. We
Yeah.
didn't all have cameras in our pockets. And
Yeah.
so it was just a different time. And so you were sort of reliant on, uh, you know, local sources of news. And at the time, I just thought like, well, it's a big city problem. I live in Ottawa. HIV isn't here. I'm in community. I don't know anyone who has it. Cut to, I absolutely knew tons of people who had
Yeah.
HIV. And it's one
Yeah.
of those things that like once you disclose that you have it, other people start disclosing to you and you realize that there's this whole network out there of people. So that's like
Yeah.
that culture of shame that you encounter really early on that you're like, well, this didn't serve me. This didn't help me. So I need to let go of that. I need to try something different. And that's what I did.
And we had information back then, but when I contracted HIV, I for a long time, well, I didn't know for a long time, and I just kept thinking, oh, I feel so healthy. I always was gauging like, do you feel sick? No, I feel good. Okay, then you must be negative. Like, what a ridiculous, and I let it go for way too long, uh, really too long. But yeah, so even with like the information that we had, it still wasn't enough. So
And I was the opposite
yeah.
of you. So I was a nervous tester. I was going in on my
Oh,
regular checkups, getting tested. There was
yeah.
no risk of transmission. I wasn't doing anything that could have led to me contracting
Oh,
HIV, but I had such paranoia. And at the
interesting.
time, the information that we did have looked different.
Yeah.
So, things like oral sex were considered low risk for transmission of HIV. So people
Yeah.
were paranoid about, exchanging blowjobs. We know now
Yeah.
that's it's negligible to almost no risk.
Yeah.
So, like the information was different then, and perception was different, and
I
we did
heard
the
it.
best that we could.
We did. Well, we did. And here we are, living and thriving. um, I heard a term from you the last time I saw you, whorephobia. And this like rung a chord with me. I loved it. So maybe can you explain to us what whorephobia is?
I mean, in a nutshell, it's just fear of sex work.
Yeah. So why?
But
What's the fear?
how?
What based in what? I mean,
Well, I saw your wonderful. Was it this podcast that you did or was it your other channel on
oh, it was my.
YouTube?
Did you see it?
I
Oh,
did. Yeah, you broke it down into
great.
five
I did,
categories.
but what is a whore? And then, so I threw in sluts, like whores and sluts, because I didn't want it to be, I was like, is a whore about sex work specifically? So I didn't want it to just be about sex workers. I just wanted it to be more about people who are sexually positive and just really open about their sexuality. So, I mean, that was my take on it. But I mean, I heard it from you originally.
Oh well. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't coin the term.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we're all whores under capitalism.
Yeah. Well,
Great.
so yeah, we could go on and on about that for sure.
Yes, we absolutely could.
Yeah. But what I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
what would make somebody afraid of sex workers in your mind?
um, well, I mean, whorephobia like even exists amongst sex workers with each other.
Hmm.
So another term that we often use is the whore archy. I can't say the word hierarchy.
Hierarchy,
Yeah, but
horror,
there's a
higher.
hierarchy.
It's a hierarchy of whores.
There's a
Okay,
hierarchy among whores, right?
that's right. Yeah.
And this idea that you perform a certain type of sex work, and that's better than your colleague who performs a different type of sex work. So,
Right.
they do full service. They're having penetrative sex. They're bad. But I just work on the phone lines, or I just have an
Right.
OnlyFans. I'm practically a model.
That's right.
Like,
Yeah.
and
I'm just a nude
and
model. Okay.
so you
Sure.
have that happening, right? And then so that contributes to it. And then, yeah, people just are like freaked out about sex, full stop, period. And I
Yeah.
think people who have sexual agency freaks people out.
Yeah.
People who haven't subscribed to all of those negative messagings around sex, it really scares people.
Yeah.
And you see that a lot with the heterosexual community, with heterosexual men in particular, who are obsessed with things like quote unquote body counts and
Yeah.
how much money should you spend on a wedding ring and all of these sort of like alt-right sort of men's rights folks,
Mm.
on the far right that are, sort of deeply, deeply, deeply fearful of sex and resentful. That I think that women have power over them in this respect.
Yeah.
And I think that, disturbs people a lot. So it's very multifaceted.
Oh my God. Yeah. There's not a simple answer to that. It's just, I think it's a fascinating topic, and it's just goes to the heart of so much of what's wrong in society, actually.
Yeah.
Um, let's talk about Maggie's.
Yeah. Let's talk about
Let's
Maggie's.
talk about Maggie's. So for people that don't know, tell us what Maggie's does here in Toronto.
Sure. So Maggie's is one of the oldest by and for sex worker advocacy and support organizations in Canada.
Mm.
We've been around for about 40 years, formed in, I believe, 86 at the height of the HIV epidemic here in Toronto. Initially, our work was doing risk and harm reduction work in relation to sexually transmitted and bloodborne infections. In the coming decades, the organization had kind of moved away from performing that work. And then about 3 years ago, we got funding through the Ministry of Health to once again return to doing that work. And that's when I joined the fold. And I manage their HIV and harm reduction program at the organization. And what that looks like is I do workshops in community, primarily around sexual health and wellness, but also sex work. And then we have an advisory committee that I run and manage of community members who help give feedback to inform the work that we're doing. And then we also do like indoor outreach. So some folks might have seen me at some of the local bathhouses here in Toronto, handing out condoms and lube and engaging people in conversations. Um, and yeah, and a myriad of other, responsibilities um, that come with
I,
the work.
I have no idea it had been around for 40 years. That's quite a testament to, first of all, it's a much needed. Tell me, so if I'm watching this and I'm thinking, oh, I wonder if I'm somebody who should slash could access the services, what's the clientele? If what's who are you helping?
So we primarily see and serve current, former, and aspiring sex workers in the GTA. We see about 1,000 people every month for a variety of needs and services.
Oh,
We have a variety of programs at the organization that can benefit people who are involved in sex work. We have a case management program. which is ideal for people who are looking to be connected to other services in the sector, in the not-for-profit sector, who, you know, maybe need support around like medical accompaniments, who maybe have some legal questions that they need support with. So our case management team can sort of help people with on an individual basis in regards to their sort of unique needs. And then we do, like I said, HIV and harm reduction programming. We have a parenting drop-in group that happens once a week on Thursdays from 2:30 to 4:30. So that's anyone who's a parent who's also a sex worker, welcome to come and access support and services. We
Wow.
have an all-gendered sex worker drop-in on Fridays from 2:30 to 5. So folks are welcome to attend that if they're involved in sex work and get a hot meal, you know, get some liquids in them, pick up condoms and lube if they need it, attend a workshop if it's relevant and they're interested, or they just want an opportunity to meet other people who are doing the work, which is the number one request that we get from the community that we serve.
Really?
Yeah, sex workers want community and they want networking opportunities. They want to form
Oh,
relationships with other people who are doing the work,
yeah.
and they want their support and they want their guidance and they want their buy-in and they want their thoughts. And so what's really exciting to me when I'm doing this work is just bringing people together in a space so that those relationships can happen.
Well, what a healthy thing too. Like it's if you think you're the only one who's doing this, or do you know what I mean? It's so isolating, and it can be dangerous because you might put yourself in situations that you wouldn't normally. You might make choices that you wouldn't normally. You might think less of yourself because other people are judging you all the time. But if you are suddenly sitting in a room with other sex workers, suddenly there's a community. I mean, these are people that understand you. They're not judging you. You can lean on them. Your safety in numbers. There's like this whole, I can see why that would be the number one thing. And you offer such things, like there was even a tax, how to do your
Mhm.
taxes. I mean, that's what? That's amazing. I would never even have thought of that, but you guys
Yeah,
offer that.
yeah. People maybe are not aware, but sex workers can claim their income on their taxes,
Yeah.
and you know, you can potentially write some of your expenses related to your work off as a result as well.
Yeah.
So it can be advantageous for people to declare their income. People should declare their income.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, we just help people with that. We help people with just general financial management because that's something that people are looking for.
Sure.
I mean, I was a former bartender, right? So like I'm not I equally is in need of these workshops because like, you know, as sex workers, like bartenders, you get your money in your hands up
Sure.
front,
It's cash in your
cash,
hand.
and
Yeah.
you know, you're not thinking like I need to put 10% of this away for
That's right.
taxes or I need to, you know. So getting all of those skills is really important.
How can, if somebody is listening and they're inspired to support Maggie's, how can they go about doing that?
Right. So they can make a donation, a financial donation if they want. They can volunteer. They can get involved on our board. They can, perhaps if they're a student, do a student placement with us. We have lots of students who do. Um, they can come to our programming, support it that way, come to the events that we're doing. They can like and subscribe and repost
Sure.
our social media messaging and our accounts. That's helpful. So there's a myriad of ways that people can get involved.
Yeah, I just love what you guys do, and I'm so in awe of your, you know, everything that you do for the community. I think it's amazing. I want to take, we have a few more minutes here, but just to end off our conversation, I want to take a left turn. I know you used to work at a bathhouse. Now, I used to work at the Spa in Maitland before it was Steamworks. Which one did you work at?
I am not going to say
Oh,
because I've worked at more than one.
oh, more than one.
I worked at two in the province of Ontario,
Okay.
years apart.
Yes.
And I won't say because you're going to ask me about some of my experiences, and I can speak more freely if
Yes.
I don't identify where. I
Okay.
also think it's important to say that I did sign an NDA when I
Oh,
worked at one of them.
what? What? This is so okay. So tell me about an
So I am a little bit
experience.
limited.
So tell, I mean, we have like a few minutes. So tell me about one of the
Sure.
experiences that happened at this bathhouse. This sounds juicy. Okay, go.
Oh, I mean, I mean, what do you want to know? I mean, okay, so I will say that one thing that I try to instill in people as a result of having worked in these spaces is that these are not as safe a space as people think they are. And it's important that you have that you look after yourself first and foremost when you're in these spaces.
Okay.
So I think that people think that because there's other people around,
Yes.
that they need to be less concerned about their substance use in the space,
Oh my God. Yeah.
around theft, around violence, around sexual
Yes.
assault. All of these things occur in these spaces. And yeah, you need to be on the be aware that that
So, okay. Is it safe
happens.
to say that you had very pretty negative experiences then in these spaces?
I love bathhouses. I and I'm curious to hear about your fascination with them because I notice when on your channel that you quite frequently interview folks connected to bathhouses, and it seems
Yes.
like it's a great area of interest for you.
Yeah.
So I love bathhouses.
Yeah.
I think they're important. I think they're a place for community mobilization. I think they're a point of access for education, for resources. Maggie's has done very successful vaccination clinics for monkeypox and COVID out of these spaces.
Right.
We do HIV prevention and education work out of these spaces. Um, they are community hubs. You know, people make friendships and form connections and have relationships and marry people that they're meeting in these spaces. So
Yeah.
I'm absolutely in awe of them. I love them. You know, some of them have gyms, so there's a health and wellness component. You know, they're a great place for relaxation. So I love but yeah, so
You're
more to
holding
your
back.
question. No, no, I have to
You're,
say that first because I don't want to be like bathhouses are scary places.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
just think it's important to like make sure that people know,
Yeah.
hey, you need to keep your wits about you when you're in these spaces and that they're
Yeah.
maybe not the most safe space that you might think they are because you're in close proximity to staff and to other people from community in them. That hasn't been my experience. I've had some really like harrowing, upsetting, depressing experiences and witnessed some pretty awful things working out of in that space.
Yeah.
um, the amount of racism among gay men towards other gay men was shocking to me
Yeah.
as a cis white gay dude. I knew from bartending and working in the clubs that that existed and that there were racist assholes in our community, but I wasn't aware of how many there were until I started working in a bathhouse
Well, they're all at the
and
bathhouse.
well, and I was largely working in one location. I was largely working with the staff of people of color, and I would observe and witness and hear how they were spoken to, how they were treated. It was quite shocking.
Yeah.
But the positive sides of
No, no. Listen.
bathhouses.
On my channel, and I'll stop the bathhouse conversation now because we only have a couple more minutes. But for myself, I always, I mean, they have such a negative, a lot of people have negative preconceived notions and all that stuff. So I always bring the other side of it. But I'm not naive, and I know that there's a lot of things are magnified in these spaces as well. Like you said, the racism and a lot about that. And maybe I should talk more about that. I've just tried in the past to do more of a promotion and the positive aspects of these spaces because I guess my personal experiences have been more on the positive side. But it's always refreshing and imperative to hear both sides, all sides, and perspectives, and that's why. So thank you. I appreciate the honesty, and I hope you didn't feel like you had to sugarcoat anything because you're talking to somebody who like supports that, whatever.
No, no, no. I support them too. Like to be
Yeah,
clear, I still support them, but
yeah.
there's always more work to be done. But
Always
I'll tell
more
you a
work to
fun
be done.
story. We would get tons of celebrities,
Yeah,
and that was always exciting and fun. We would get celebrities from other countries that a North American audience would not necessarily recognize, but like maybe someone from Brazil would. And
yeah,
so that was always exciting. And someone on staff would be like, do you know who that is? And I'd be like, I
yeah.
have no clue. And they're like, that's that diesel model from blah, 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 blah. And you're like, wow,
Yeah.
My favorite was, and I won't say their name,
Oh.
but there was a Netflix series that was really popular at the time, and we were all talking about it late one night.
Ooh.
And at the same time, it was TIFF, the Toronto
Oh,
International Film Festival, and there was a
yes.
lot of
Of
celebrities that were in
course.
town for that, including this one person who was on this popular Netflix show at the time. And so we were discussing the show, and then literally 20 minutes later, someone comes to the counter and says, "Can I have a new towel, please?" And it's one of the stars of
It's
this
literally
show,
one of the stars from the Netflix show.
butt naked.
Oh,
It
God.
was
And you're
like a
not going to tell
dream.
us who.
No, I won't. I can't give a name, but it was surreal, absolutely surreal. And there would be
Michael,
people you would see celebrities and you would like hear them speak, and
yeah.
you'd be like, that person sounds like so and so, and then you'd be like, oh my, they,
Wait a minute.
it would be them.
It's actually them. Michael, I'm going to thank
Yeah,
you.
it was so exciting.
I'm going to thank you so much for being on the podcast. I'm putting all the links down in the description below for Maggie's, and
Please
come back and talk to
come
us
join book
again
club.
sometimes. Come join book club, everybody. And for the rest of you, I will see you on the next episode of Queerly Us.